Welcome to the Dr. Dad's podcast, where a naturopath and chiropractor come together each week to share lifestyle medicine, health advice, and inspiring interviews with some of the top experts in health and wellness, bringing you the latest in nutrition, exercise, ancient healing, toxins and detox, your microbiome, mindset, hormones, brain, and much more. Stay tuned. We're going to teach you how to experience growth daily.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We got the Dr. Dads here with an amazing guest that we're super excited to chat with today, Cynthia Thurlow, nurse practitioner. And David, how's everything going down south right now for you, buddy?
It's hot, brother. I thought the summer was over, but it came back with a vengeance, and we're hitting like 106, 105. So it's been warm, man. This morning, walking into the office, I was sweating already. So yeah,
lucky you. Summer's still alive and thriving where you're at.
I'm missing that Vancouver coolness that I had a couple months ago, man.
Yeah.
It feels like Vancouver here in Washington, D.C. It's in the 70s. We had a cold front. And so for us, this is cold this time of the year, but I'm really enjoying it. It feels like late September. It's nice.
Wow.
I'm so jealous right now. Thank you all for that.
Yeah. Right. You can just picture it in your mind's eye.
Yes.
Coolness. So Cynthia is here with us today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her and her history. And then we're going to dive into some amazing conversations. So Cynthia is a nurse practitioner, an entrepreneur, functional nutritionist, and a certified wellness coach. She's been helping women find wellness through the healing power of nutrition and solving health problems from the inside out, which is so important. And she's not just a nurse practitioner. She's also a mom. She's a wife, and she has all boys. And my wife can relate because she's got all boys as well. So Cynthia. Yeah, exactly. You guys are very strong to be able to handle that many boys. So she's worked in clinical medicine, both in the ER and cardiology for over 20 years. The power of Western medicine's approach to acute and life-threatening disease and emergencies is undeniable. However, she started to question the approach to ongoing symptom management in chronic health problems. She started to think more about the root causes and chronic health problems of her patients. Became passionate about learning about how she could help her family, her patients, the community, the clients, all suffering from needlessly in this space where, unfortunately, conventional medicine isn't at the top of its game. So, Cynthia, we're so honored to have you here. And on top of that, I mean, if you get the chance, stop what you're doing right now, go watch Cynthia on her TED Talk, learn a little bit more about what she's doing, because we're going to take what she learned or what she shared there and dive into a whole lot deeper information. So for those of you who are still here and haven't switched over to the TED Talk right away, Cynthia, please dive in and tell us a little bit more about that transition. How does a nurse practitioner working in conventional cardiology, et cetera, move into this field of wellness?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that struck me at some point, I mean, I had been a nurse practitioner for a while and I'd always done cardiology. I was really passionate about the heart. I just found it fascinating. There was, I love the adrenaline fueled experience of being in the hospital, dealing with acutely sick patients. I love being in clinic with my patients. But over time, I grew increasingly frustrated with the fact that we were so focused on pill symptomatology, meaning someone comes in with a symptom, there has to be a pill that will fix the symptom. And the fact that I was noticing that my patients, when I would talk to them about diet and nutrition, or even just moving their bodies or getting more sleep, 90% of them tune me out because we've really conditioned our patients to be very focused on a pill solution as opposed to a lifestyle solution. But the patients of mine that were willing to do the work would suddenly need less blood pressure medicine. Maybe they made a reduction in their statins, less diabetic medication, or even insulin. And so I just grew increasingly disenfranchised with the concept of writing prescriptions. And I tell people very openly, I got tired of writing scripts because that's what you do all day long. That's all I did was write prescriptions. And I started to really question quite a bit when one of my children was diagnosed with life-threatening food allergies. It caused me to look a little deeper. And there was a book that I think is pivotal for me. It's by Robin O'Brien called The Unhealthy Truth. And it took me about a week to read the book, not because it's very long, but because I was so angry when I started making these connections about the foods we were eating and why they were having this rampant uptick in allergies and sensitivities and autoimmune issues and obesity and just all these things. And that book changed my life. I always say for the better, because it suddenly got me thinking about what would be the next step. I knew that I was a great nurse practitioner. I knew a lot about cardiology. Obviously, I'm a total adrenaline junkie, but I started to be thinking much more thoughtfully about how to really look at long-term wellness. And I've always been very fit. So is my husband. But I started to really look at our diet and nutrition and thinking that some of the things we were eating were so healthy, and realizing after the fact they really weren't. And that really pushed me to, initially I became a wellness coach, and that was kind of interesting, but that didn't really do it for me. But food, like really talking to people about food, lit me up. And so becoming functionally trained in nutrition, I didn't want to do functional medicine training, largely because I already invested a huge amount of money in my education. And I just felt like, eventually my kids have to go to college. I'm not looking to, spend as much money as I did on my undergraduate education on this, but I found, food is really the root for so many issues. And so I kind of dove into it, and my colleagues were really supportive. I mean, that's the thing that I have to really say, is that a lot of the referrals I get are from the same people I work side by side with in multiple specialties. There's a lot of respect for what I'm doing. And so I took a huge leap of faith 3.5 years ago, and left clinical medicine. And that was a very hard decision to make, but absolutely the right decision. There have been so many things. The universe has kind of validated this decision on so many levels for me that there's no question this is the path I'm meant to be on. And I always say that, I have my boys, and I always say I was meant to be their mom, and I was meant to be married to my husband. But what I was really meant to do in terms of my life service is the work I'm doing now, because I can impact so many more people than just sitting in a large cardiology group in Washington, D.C. So for me, it was really absolutely the next best step.
Amazing. I'm curious, how old was your son? Or was it was your youngest son or your oldest son? And
my oldest son.
So how old was he when you started to question things a little bit more?
Well, when he was 4 months old, so I breastfed both my kids till they were a little over a year. So when he was 4 months old, he started developing, horrendous eczema. I've never seen a kid with eczema as bad as he had. Wow. And, I took him, my typical, bring him to a pediatrician, new parent, doubting my, intuitiveness. And I asked very innocently, do you think it's something I'm eating? Because he's exclusively breastfed. Could it be something I'm eating that's making him so sick? Mm-hmm. Nope. This is just one of those things. It's wintertime. He's got dry skin. And so, they would prescribe these high potency, corticosteroids that we would put on his skin, which of course improved things until he got another flare. And so I kept asking, is it food? Could it be food? Switched pediatricians, still got the same answers. And that's what got me really interested in, speaking to other people. I brought him to the allergist because I was concerned. I said, if I'm eating something that's making him sick, or if he's allergic to something I'm unaware of. And the allergist actually said, when she did blood work, in addition to doing some skin testing, she said, these results can't be correct. They're so high, it was RAS testing. This can't possibly, let's recheck him in a couple months. And in a couple months, they were just as high. And she said, and her words were, there's no way you can avoid all of these allergens. You just have to carry EpiPens and pray. Wow. And that left an indelible impression on me, because I then became fearful. I was fearful to take my child out to eat. I was fearful to go out to eat with him. I felt like I wanted to put him in a bubble. And then I had a second child, and I was like, I can't live this way. And so I think for myself, so much of my passion and concerns about food are really the fact that there's so many people navigating, trying to live lives where food really makes them very sick. And so I got to a point where we could navigate going out to eat and preparing things at home. But it was a couple years where we were very fearful. And my husband had never seen anaphylaxis. He had never seen a life-threatening food allergy. I'd seen many of those in the ER, had a healthy amount of respect for anaphylaxis. And you read about people who, even if they get EpiPens, die before they get to the hospital. So for me, it was a couple of years of being in fear. And then I was like, my typical, I grew up in New Jersey. I was like, screw this, there has to be a better way. And so that kind of started the journey of, really, looking more closely and more thoughtfully at everything we were doing, and looking at the food supply. And Robin and Brian's book, I get no kickbacks from her recommending her books. I just respect her enormously. This growing awareness that consumers really want more for themselves, more for their families. They want to be able to eat food and not be fearful of, making someone, in a life-threatening situation, or just making themselves sick.
Mm-hmm. And for someone who's got resources, I mean, this is just you speaking to that state of fear as a parent, seeing your kid struggle and not really knowing, not having the answers, not knowing everything you do about it, and trying to manage that. I mean, that's hard for anybody.
Yes.
The fact that you had those resources just made it all the more real that, wow, this is happening to so many people all over the world.
Yeah. We start to think about the cost of EpiPens, a few years ago. So anyone that's listening, if you have a child with allergies, you carry EpiPens like they're water. You have to carry one with you. They have to go to school with them. They have to go everywhere they go. And so a few years ago, it was costing people hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get one set of EpiPens. And I said to the pharmacist, I was like, what are people doing that don't have the money? Like, we could spend $200 on a couple sets of EpiPens. But I said, I'm thinking about the average human being, the average person that's living in this country, even indigent people, how are they paying for these things? And they said they just don't. And I said, that broke my heart. I was like, that's unacceptable that we have a medical model that makes, medications, whether it be insulin or EpiPens, so expensive. And I mean, I fired off, emails and messages and, tweeted stuff. I mean, I tend to be very proactive as opposed to reactive. I'm like, this is unacceptable. There are probably far more families that can't afford to purchase EpiPens than there are that can. This is just absolutely unacceptable. And recognizing that, that the CEO of the company that manufactures EpiPens she was just making an absolute killing in terms of profits. And I was like, this is unconscionable. So I could get on a total soapbox about that, but yes, it's unbelievable. It really is.
So I'm curious, on this journey you took with your son, how did that all play out? So you started kind of connecting the dots, you started looking for new solutions. I'd imagine you took more of a functional medicine approach at this point, which was probably not the case of your training in conventional medicine, right? And so just take us on a little, I guess, quick Cliff Notes version of how that all played out for your son and how you connected those dots and how, just how he's doing now. And
Yeah, it's a great question. So obviously we radically changed our diets, meaning we were making, not that I ever ate badly. Let's be real. I've always been healthy weight, all those things. But I started making a lot of things from scratch. I started learning about alternatives to gluten as an option. He has tree nut and peanut allergies. So that limits, you always say it's like your world gets a little small when you're trying to eat gluten-free and you're trying not to use rice flours. And so we got savvy with baking with cassava flour and just learning to really make a lot of stuff from scratch, which I know is not like super sexy. And people hear that, they're like, I don't have time for that. I get it. But when your kid can't eat what's available, I didn't want him to feel like he was missing out. If he went to a birthday party, we always had to bring separate food for him. We always had to bring alternative like fun foods for him just so he can enjoy himself. But, I think it started with the food and then, just aligning myself. One of the things that I got very actively involved with was a community-based program called Real Food for Kids. And so a lot of advocacy for children and nutrition, working with Title I schools to try to bring programs there, trying to change the options that were available at the schools that my children were enrolled in. I'm in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, but we're in a county that has a lot of farming. And so we were trying to get meat sourced locally, vegetables, grown, sourced and sourced locally to be made available for children. So I think a lot of what that drove for me was the advocacy piece, but also learning how to really cook from scratch and, trying out recipes and getting him involved in the kitchen and, talking to people that had similar issues. There were a lot of people in my area who were also very passionate, but we found that there was a lot of safety in numbers. So if we were trying to advocate for our children and we had a large amount of community members that would show up at a board of supervisors meeting, that was powerful, as opposed to one voice trying to advocate for their child, trying to advocate for stronger allergy guidelines for children in schools. I think when you're talking about healing the gut, you're really looking at gut health. And so we did a lot of diagnostic testing, food sensitivity testing, in addition to allergy testing. We did a pretty powerful test called the GI map. That's only been out for a few years, but I think that's the best I think that's the gold standard stool test, but really diving in to look at what's going on with his gut. And he's a competitive swimmer. I'll give you an example. A lot of bugs in the pool, which is disgusting to think about. Chlorine only kills so much. So he's constantly exposed to parasites and other types of unsightly microorganisms on a regular basis. So, gut health has a lot to do with, can you fight off those infections? And we've done a ton of work on his gut. We found out he had SIBO, which is not something that just comes up. That's not an acute thing. That's chronic. It's like the domino effect. And so we very diligently have addressed, he had H. pylori, he had parasites, he had SIBO, and we've addressed these things very methodically. And so to get back to your original question, it always starts with food, removing the inflammatory foods, addressing, any imbalances that are there. I mean, we've done more gut healing on this kiddo, and it's been interesting to see because there are so many non-pharmaceuticals that you can use that were probably in vogue before we had antibiotics. And so using things like berberine, as an example, or, things that are available that can be highly antimicrobial in nature and can help clean up what's going on in the gut. And so, through his journey, I became more impassioned about wanting to help people and find alternatives. So, I think that there's a lot about functional medicine that I find utterly, utterly fascinating. It really does provide a different lens with which to look at, symptoms and, deep dive a little bit more into causes. But there's obviously still a place for traditional medicine. I will be the first person to say, if you're sick and you need surgery, or you've got, an urgent need, that is absolutely what I think Western medicine really shines with. That you don't want to not have one without the other, but, finding a way to kind of bridge them both, I think is really critical.
Well, and on that note, I have a quick question or thought, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. So I agree with you. There are needs for conventional medicine, like surgery, like you're saying, or certain drug therapies, based off certain diseases and where they're at as far as severity. But you went from learning one piece and you've kind of dipped into the other. And the chronic degenerative stuff that we see now that many people are suffering with, from autoimmune to some of these other problems, where would you say conventional medicine has a place with stuff like that?
That's tough, because I really feel like the two things that are missing from the Western medicine piece is prevention and chronic disease management. So I think we've largely convinced our patient population that a pill will solve everything. And so really there's a need. I mean, there absolutely is a need for, pharmaceuticals at specific, intervals. But I just think that we don't talk to our patients enough about sleep and stress management and exercise and dietary management. And so that's the side of functional medicine that I think is really critical. And I do think there are a lot of traditionally Western medicine trained providers, because I know so many of them personally, that are really trying to bridge that gap. They do see the merits in both sides. I use diabetes as the best example, or the worst example of, we wait until someone really has full-blown diabetes to address things instead of addressing the insulin resistance. I mean, how many times, so this will really date me, when I finished my nurse practitioner program a long time ago, the feeling was if you had a fasting glucose up to 140 or less, you didn't have diabetes. Well, now, I mean, those numbers creep now. It's like 80 to 90. I mean, so really things have come full circle. We're learning a whole lot more, but I feel like diabetes is a really great example of something that we wait till someone has full-blown diabetes before we start to worry about things. I can't tell you how many people, I can't tell you how many people I interact with, and they'll say, oh, my hemoglobin A1C is 6. I'm like, that's not good. That's something we need to be reactionary about that. We don't wait till it gets to be 7 and say, okay, now you have diabetes. So I think that it's a very delicate balance, because I truly believe a lot of the very traditional Western medicine trained providers that hold very tightly to that paradigm really struggle. And they'll say it's woo-woo. They'll say it's, black magic. They'll say that you're wrong. They don't want to think about those other things. And I always say, part of what I was trained in, and I trained at a big research hospital, I was taught to question everything. I question everything, even though, I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm not an MD. there are times where I will take heat on social media because people say, well, you're not a physician. And I'm like, that's true. I'm not a physician, but I do have a brain and I do question everything. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I look at it as an evolution. Like I met with some alumni at my university I attended, and they were saying, you are a perfect consummate example of a Hopkins nurse because you question everything. Like that's exactly, you're cutting edge, you're doing things differently, you're blazing your own path. And I said, because that's what's best for the people that I work with. Mm-hmm. It's so much better for me to evolve as an individual and not play it safe and not be a sheep. Like I tell my kids, do not be a sheep. Like I will always support them, but I'm like, you should question things. If it doesn't seem right, you know, I again, we go back to the example of diabetes. How many people do we let get full-blown diabetes before we start telling them you should be eating low carb, you should, you know, be going ketogenic, you should be working on your gut health, you should be dialing in on your sleep and your stress and all these other things way before you've got full-blown diabetes. Mm-hmm. There's so many other ways to address that. And I've had really, really great results with things like berberine is so, I just keep using that as an example. Berberine is such a great agent to add in for someone that's dealing with insulin resistance. A lot of my 40-ish women that I work with really start to become insulin resistant as they become perimenopausal. And so really critical thing that you can, you know, kind of add in if it's appropriate for you to be doing. Definitely discuss that with your healthcare provider.
Yeah, beautiful, because I mean the conventional model uses the same hormone that's out of whack within the individual. So the treatment mm-hmm. for type 2 diabetes is more insulin.
Yep.
Insulin resistance is the problem. So you started to segue into something really important, which is your journey over the last few years, which mm-hmm. is drove you into helping correct insulin resistance through the use of fasting and intermittent fasting specifically. So tell us a little bit about that segue into that world.
Yeah, you know, I have to laugh because I was initially very skeptical. This is my traditional, I'm skeptical, then I try it, then I figure out whether or not it works. So with tremendous skepticism, in the same month, I had both a colleague and my personal trainer tell me that I should try intermittent fasting, which I thought was crazy, like absolutely crazy. And so I initially, you know, tried it on myself.
Right there.
Yeah. Yeah. My dogs don't like intermittent fasting. Sorry, this is typical. So what it came down to was someone brought up the concept. I did a little bit of research. I decided to try it out. I thought I might die if I didn't eat breakfast because we're so conditioned to believe breakfast is the most important meal of the day, which is complete BS. And then I started doing it. And then I had so much mental clarity. Like for me, the first thing I noticed was, oh my gosh, I have so much energy. I can go to the gym fasted. I can work out fast. I used to be one of those people that would show up at the gym. I'd have a protein shake going to the gym and a protein shake after, and then I'd go to the hospital. And so all of a sudden I had all this energy. I had so much mental clarity. I got so much done in the morning, and that got the ball kind of rolling. And then I started talking a little bit about it with my clients, some of which were receptive, some of which were not. And then I started writing about it, and then it kind of steamrolled. And you know, I have done a lot of local TV work. And so one of the first segments I ever did was I pitched the idea about intermittent fasting, and that moved on. And then the funny thing is I'm an introvert, which people sometimes find surprising. And my team hates when I use that word because they have a different connotation of introvert. I wanted to do a TED Talk. And so the reason why I wanted to do TED Talk is I'm an introvert and I wanted to do something that would scare me a little bit. And so we started the application process, which is very lengthy. And I think most people don't realize that. And you go through many, many rejections before you actually get a talk. And at the time, I wasn't going to talk about intermittent fasting. I got to talk about a different topic. And then I got offered a second talk, and I needed to come up with another topic. And I said to my husband one night, what do I know a lot about? And he goes, oh God, intermittent fasting. It's all you talk about. And so, so my second TED Talk was about intermittent fasting. And I think the really interesting part of that talk in particular, and you want to talk about Western medicine saving your life, I had gone on vacation with my husband, and within 48 hours, I was in the hospital, and I was very, very sick. I almost died. And so I spent 13 days in the hospital, lost 13 pounds, had to delay having surgery. And in between, I did a TED Talk. You know, my whole mindset when I was in the hospital was this whole concept of surrender. surrender on a physical, emotional, and spiritual level, because having always been very healthy, we take our health for granted till we don't have our health. Mm-hmm. And, my surgeons are spinning their brains trying to figure out, like, why are you so sick? We just can't figure this out. And so in my mind, I was like, I want to get home to my family. And I was like, I'll be goddamned. If I get out of this hospital, I am doing that talk. It is going to happen. People need to hear this information. And so I did the talk, having only been out of the hospital for 27 days. And the crazy thing is, I feel like the universe gives you these opportunities. It makes you give a little to get a little. I never did a talk to have it go viral. It was never even a consider. Never even thought that. I don't think that way. That wasn't what I thought. I just wanted people to have good strategies to get healthier, because I feel like it's such an important strategy to discuss with our patients. And so that's, that was the start of the TED Talk, not realizing that was going to be, such a pivotal decision for me to have made. But I think the funny thing is that people always ask me, well, it's a good strategy for men because your talk is focused on women. I said, no, the curators wanted me to focus on women. They wanted someone to focus on a women's health issue. But yeah, it's a great strategy for men and for women. And the really encouraging thing is that every day I get messages from people, either emails or, social media DMs, people just thanking me. They're like, this is the first thing that's worked for me. I've lost 20 pounds. I'm off my insulin, or I'm off my blood pressure medicine, or I suddenly feel strong enough to be able to, reconnect with loved ones. Because really, as healthcare providers, part of our service to others is really providing them with strategies to live their best life. And I think that we've gotten so far away from what that really represents, that to me, to know that it's something that's free and flexible and they can take with it as they wish, that's fantastic. Like, that to me is exciting, like so exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And you're talking about arming people with tools that they can use for lifestyle medicine. And that's one of the things I love that resonates with you, is you're all about this lifestyle medicine for prevention. But then also, if you're already dealing with some chronic health issues, you're still implementing these things, and you're just arming these people with these amazing tools that are so simple to use, that have these massive changes. And, and it's funny that you tell that story about how scared you were to do intermittent fasting at the front end.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so funny because we were all taught the same physiology in school. And if you look at the foundation of how our bodies work, it makes complete sense. But how did we get so far away from something so simple that we all should be doing all the time?
Well, I think it's also, I was doing a podcast a few months ago, and they were talking about the rise of the processed food industry, and I wrote a book a couple months ago with a colleague, and one of the things part of my contribution to the book was talking about the rise of the processed food industry. I had no idea. After World War II, all these conveniences were brought in for women that went back to work after the war. And, what started as a great idea to make people's lives easier has morphed and evolved into a chemical, pardon me, can I say shitstorm? Yes. It just evolved in this chemical, stew of disgustingness. There's a great book called Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moore. And so that was another book. When I read it, it just made me angry. But, you talk about bliss points and food scientists. And so this has contributed to diabetes, high fructose corn syrup, all these things that they try to poo-poo are not the reasons for why we have all this profound inflammation. But I'm like, when I was a kid, we had 3 meals a day. My mother was, first generation Italian. There was no snacking in my house. We had, she was crunchy without being super crunchy, but baked her own bread. We ate organ meats. I think about it now, it still makes me cringe. I still don't like liver, but I appreciate the fact that she tried to get us to eat those things. But the point being, we've gotten so far away from the way that our bodies are designed to move and eat. We are designed to eat and then fast. Instead, what we do is we eat all day long and we just stoke this insulin, and that's just making us so fat. And, if people do nothing else, if they just try to eat meals and not snacks, that will benefit them. Shortening that feeding window benefits them. And it's not, someone said to me, oh, it's just because they're eating less calories. I was like, no, you don't understand the science behind all of this. That's the really cool thing, is that, the more you learn, the more I'm like, this is just amazing. Like, I have had so many doubtful physicians, God bless them, my friends who were completely convinced they couldn't do intermittent fasting and do rounds overnight in the hospital. They couldn't work in the ICU and be fasted. And I'll be darned if I don't get these messages from them and they're like, this really works. Like, I feel like I can share this with my patients because it worked for me. And I'm like, to me, it's like this wonderful domino effect of just sharing great information that, you know, you can impact so many lives. And that to me is so cool.
I love that you took it back to just genealogy a little bit. You know, this was something that was just part of daily life. You know, it's so funny how this modern food movement has incorporated snacking into our lives. And I remember getting ready for dinner, Christmas dinner, whatever, with my grandparents who came over from Denmark, and they used to like smack the crap out of us if we tried to eat food before dinner time or in between. You know, they used to really get irritated by that because, well, for one thing, as a parent, as we all know, you snack your kids, they're not going to eat that meal.
Correct.
They're going to look for the best tasting piece on your plate, and really limits that variety of food. And so parents listening, you know, this isn't just a strategy to lose weight or, you know, just improve insulin resistance. This is a strategy that absolutely transforms the kid's palate biochemically, their brain growth and development. I mean, this is built into our very, necessity for biochemistry and neurology and becoming better human beings without that constant addictive cycle of that hit of insulin. So it's a very real phenomenon.
It really is. And it's unfortunate because I think that we've been conditioned again, that, you know, our kids need to have a bag of crap after they have a baseball game or a soccer game. It's like these kids have, you know, maybe run around for 30 minutes. No, they don't need more snacks. Like, it used to make me cringe. In fact, my kids will talk about this. I'm the embarrassing parent that would bring like fruit, like cut up fruit to like games, you know, I would get stuck with the snack parent, you know, for the week. And, you know, generally the kids would, as they got older, they wouldn't take the fruit, but I would bring bottled water, which my kids thought was increasingly, it was like a lame concept. And then I would try to buy like non-GMO popcorn. Like, okay, maybe the kids all took the popcorn, maybe they took a water, rarely would they take a piece of fruit. But we've just conditioned our kids' palates. I agree. They're so sensitized to sugar. And if you look at even like condiments, this is what drives me crazy. I always say, talk about sneaky sugar. It's in condiments, it's in salad dressing. I mean, we're just inundated by sugar all the time. You know, it was interesting. I'll give you an example. The other day, a client said, "Oh, I want to try these jicama chips." And so jicama is a root vegetable. And, you know, it's a kind of like a combination between a potato and an apple, you know, potato consistency, but it's pretty mild. And so I'm laughing as I'm, you know, looking at this chip, and I'm like, there's sugar in this chip. So what went from being a fairly healthy alternative to like a potato chip is now a sugary jicama chip. And so I took one bite and I was like, I told her, I said, first of all, they're disgusting. I'd rather you just have like Jason's organic. Yeah, it's like, it's just disgusting. I'm like, ugh. No one wants their jicama to be sweet. It just really wasn't very good. But, you know, it's one of many examples of, you know, consumerism just driving, you know, people's palate preferences. So.
Well, and these poor kids, I mean, you know, my little boy just started kindergarten this year, and one of the big things we're having to work on with him, like you're saying, is like we're the weird parents that bring the healthy food, right? So I drop him off in the cafeteria in the morning, you know, with his class, and all the kids are eating breakfast. And the first day we show up, they're eating cinnamon rolls with like chocolate milk, and then the next day they have cereal. So of course, like, he's eating a healthy meal at home, but he gets to school and he sees that and he's like, Dad, I want that. And so I have to sit there and explain to him what it's made of, you know, all the bad things that are in it. And like you're saying, we're trying to find these healthy replacements for our kids so they don't feel like they're left out and they're not enjoying these things. But helping them create that understanding at that age of why they need to be doing this. And it's so hard because it's 24/7. I mean, like you're saying, we're being bombarded with sugar, and it's one of these real toxins that we have all the time. And it's really, really difficult to get these little people to understand the why there as well. So,
man, you couldn't have timed that better.
Right? He must have heard me. His ears are ringing.
So cute.
Diego just walked into the camera. For those of you listening,
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm just glad it's not my teenagers and tweens, because they know better. But yeah, that's adorable. But I think it's also like, I got my kids in the kitchen early. And so I have one kid in particular who really likes to cook. And so last night he made an almond flour crust pizza, and it was like grass-fed beef sausage and like heirloom tomatoes and goat cheese. And so I put it up on social media and people are like, oh my God, your kids did that? I was like, well, supervision, yeah. But I want to get my kids in the kitchen. I want them to be able to create things that appeal to their palate. I want them to feel comfortable doing that, because eventually they will be independent adults. That scares the heck out of me, that will come at some point. But I think it's so critical that they understand. Like my little guy, who's not so little, he's 11. But over the summer, they were taking some science classes, and the teacher was a vegan. And my son knows how I'm very open-minded about a lot of things, but not veganism. And so, she very nicely was trying to explain what it was. And my son, kept saying, well, we need animal protein. We need to have those healthy fats. So it was like they were having this ongoing discussion. And she actually said to me, she was like, he was very respectful, but it's very evident he feels very strongly about the type of food that you eat at home. And she's like, I think that's great. And I said, gosh, I'm hoping he didn't say anything to embarrass himself. She's like, no, he was very respectful, but feeling this whole advocacy for themselves. We've got these growing generations of kids that, some of them feel like maligned, or if they don't have issues. My older son, he has quite a few friends with food allergies. And so he feels a certain degree of safety with them. Like, not only can he go to their house, he doesn't have to worry about being exposed to things that might bother him, but he also feels like there's not as much social pressure if he eats the weird food, as he refers to it. He's like, I don't want to be the kid eating the weird food. I'm like, well, sometimes we are the people eating the weird food. Like sometimes I show up to parties with, meals that I bring for myself, and my friends know me well enough. They're like, just let her do her thing. That's totally fine.
But you know what the reality though is, the social pressures is felt at the level of the parent, right?
Yep.
And I can't tell you how many patients that would walk in with their kids, and so my wife usually sees the families, and we have conversations all the time, and where some parents go, you know what, I'm going to take this on, I'm going to make this part of our lifestyle, and there's still a good chunk of people that go, you know what, I can't do this, I just can't do it. And
they're not ready.
As us as the practitioner, we're thinking like, how could you not do this for your children? And their life, their future, everything depends on you doing this, but it just becomes too hard. And it's not passing judgment. It's just a reality of like, yeah, this isn't the easy path.
No, it's much harder. And I think it's also that piece that I was raised by parents that taught me that food is fuel. Food was never a source of comfort. And I grew up in a divorced household and was a latchkey kid before it was in vogue. And, I have 2 sets of parents. But I think there are a lot of, children and adults who grew up feeling food is a source of comfort. And if you talk about removing, something that is their coping mechanism, and I'm very sensitive to this, that can really be scary. Like I have clients of my own that have really struggled. Like I know why they've stopped, coming to their sessions, because they feel like they're not able to make those changes. They're like, you can't take away my rice, my gluten, my whatever it is that they're sensitive to. They're just not able to like wrap their head around the fact there are alternatives. I always say there's always an alternative. And there is no one it's never, Marie Forleo said she uses the word unfigureoutable, which is not a real word, but I like the fact that she tries to, really emphasize like there's always a solution. And that's always my mindset. I'm like, there will always be a solution. We will always find an alternative. It is never going to be you're alone on an island and unsupported. But you're right. There are definitely people that are just not in a position. They're just not ready. And that's what it comes down to. They're just not ready to make that first step. They're too fearful. Might be fear that's guiding that decision for them, but they're just not ready.
Yeah.
Well, and I think everybody has a different starting point. You said something important. You got to get your kids in the kitchen. I see a lot of adults that are in their 30s, even some in their 50s, 60s. They didn't grow up in the kitchen. They don't know how to cook. They never learned how to cook. So their reality is eating out 24/7 or eating convenience type foods, processed foods, because that's just always been the reality of their life. So, you take someone who's now dealing with a chronic degenerative disease or has health issues, and you're trying to get them to start to cook and start to learn these things. And it's like a completely different world for them. Absolutely. And so we're huge advocates as well of like, get your kids in the kitchen, teach them about food, have them cook, because I believe that's where it has to start. And if you don't do that for your kids, you are honestly going to set them up for failure because they can't turn into young adults and not know how to cook and be healthy. It's not possible. Absolutely.
And it's interesting. So I'm married to he's an engineer, finance guy. And one of the things I loved about my husband when I met him was that he cooked. You know, he was a single guy. You know, I got married at 32 and he was 34. And so you live long enough, you're either going to be eating out, takeout, which is what most of my guy friends did, or you were cooking for yourself. And so now that my husband and I both work from home, my husband actually is the protein guy. So on Sunday night, he's cooking bison, he's cooking, beef, he's cooking, fish, depending on whatever's going on. Right now, we're not doing chicken or turkey in our house, which is a whole other story. But he's the one cooking all the proteins, because when my kids go to school, they don't want sandwiches. They want a meal. So they're having leftovers from dinner. And so one of my friends was remarking, she was like, I think that's fascinating. Like, your kids would rather do like a ragu of like ground bison and ground beef and have that with, I don't know, cauli rice, or, my kids do some grains. And so that's what they would prefer to have to eat. And they always have a vegetable and always have a fruit, and they pack their own lunches now, and that's their preference. But I think it's really, really critical. Like, my kids see both parents, cooking, and we get them involved as well. Like, when my youngest started cooking omelets, he thought that was the greatest thing ever, because there's never an excuse now for him not to be able to have an omelet. Like, over the summer, every day he's got the omelet pan out, he's making an omelet and, making sourdough bread, and, he's got this, really amazing, like, locally sourced bacon, and he just felt like he was king of the kitchen. But I agree with you. That's really where it starts from. And I think we have to be sensitive to that as providers, that it's meeting our patients where they are. Mm-hmm. Because if we sit in judgment, we're going to turn people away, and that's not what we want to do. Like, it could be someone maybe does takeout 7 days a week, or maybe it's, maybe we can turn it around. Maybe we can find ways to make things easier. I always say it's pay or play. Like, when you go to the grocery store now, there's so many great options. You can buy pre-cut vegetables. You can buy, kebabs that are already made. You can, buy riced cauliflower if you're grain free. And so there's all these nice alternatives. If you're still not in a position where you're really comfortable in the kitchen, there's always a way around it. Or like a slow cooker. That's the one thing I say. You can dump a bunch of stuff in a slow cooker. It always tastes good at the end.
Well, and I make this joke all the time, but I honestly think one of the next big things in the health arena is going to be these little businesses that teach people how to cook.
We have a couple locally.
Because I honestly think there are massive amounts of people that just need basic training on how to work in the kitchen.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I have a couple resources locally, and there are a few women that they're high-powered executives. They don't have the time, and so they hire out. And so I've got a couple chefs that will go into their kitchen, make everything for them, put it in the refrigerator. I know that's not realistic, but I agree with you that we've lost this art of cooking, and that's really what it's designed to be. Like, when I was growing up, my parents took great pride in watching me create things in the kitchen. Even if it didn't taste good, they were just happy. I was cooking something. Even if it was a box of pasta and some prepackaged sauce, they were happy. They're like, okay, these are life skills. You're creating something. This is creative. This is important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I like to think of it even just that level of the nervous system. What helps to establish that parasympathetic tone is smelling the spices, being in the meditative space while you're cooking. Like, that's really where digestion begins, is when you start thinking
in the brain.
About it.
Yep.
So it's a powerful tool. So I want to move back into fasting a little bit and talk about, what does it mean for a woman to start to adopt a fasting schedule so that it is supporting and nurturing them. And this could be for men too, but women also with any concerns around body image, because I know when we bring in the word fasting for people, we think we're going to waste away. Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing left of us. And what does that mean from a triggering mechanism, maybe from the past, whether it be an eating disorder, bulimia, et cetera, how do you help women through this conversation? Because it's a really important one.
Yeah, no, those are some great questions. So we always start off with, while you're sleeping at night, that counts. So people say, oh my gosh, I can't do like 16 more hours after sleeping. And I always remind them, you probably are fasting already. You just don't realize you're doing it. So if you eat dinner at 6 and you don't eat your breakfast till 8 o'clock, that's 14 hours fasted. I mean, you're already a rock star. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it's the conditioning that you're not going to die. That there's a big concern that, we've been conditioned to believe that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And I start to explain to them, these are the benefits. Everyone focuses on weight loss, or at least women do. But I was like, there's so many more benefits, autophagy, that spring cleaning of the cells, talking about lowered insulin levels, talking about lower blood pressure and improved cognition and reduction in, your likelihood of developing type 3 diabetes. So we kind of walk them through a typical day. Like, you're either feeding or fasting. Those are the only two options. And so maybe you start off with 14 hours, and then we may increase it by 30 minutes every couple of days. And, strategies to get through that. Like, you can drink water, you can drink plain coffee, you can drink plain tea, and explaining what some of those attributes in tea and coffee can be beneficial. And so I'm always staying attuned to someone's history. If someone has had a disordered relationship with food, especially the anorexics in particular, they sometimes can take the concept of intermittent fasting and kind of run with it. Sometimes they'll give themselves an excuse not to eat at all. So it's really teasing out who's appropriate for that. And so obviously sometimes people are not. And I always explain it's not a deficiency in you. It's just not meant to work for every single person. But we start off with strategies of what to do while you're fasting, distraction. If someone's watching their clock from 8 o'clock in the morning till 12 and trying to make that, to that 16-hour window, and they're miserable, I'm like, you got to go take a walk, get yourself busy, get away from, the mindset of not focusing on what you're missing, focusing on what you're benefiting from, like what are the benefits? And then talking about how are you going to choose to break your fast? That's always a really critical piece. Some people are not ready to eat a meal per se when they initially break their fast. And so I kind of walk them through options. I try to walk them through options of foods that they can consume, and then talking about really tightening up that feeding window, because if they stay within, an 8 or a 6 hour window, I find that people do really well. I'm not necessarily a devotee of the one meal a day. I know that I have, many people I know in my social scene that really works well for them. I don't find that works particularly well for women. Women usually do 2 good sized meals during their 8 hour feeding window. And then just making sure they're staying really hydrated. And once your feeding window is done, it's done. But the great thing is it's totally flexible. So if you're traveling different time zones, you can adjust it based on the time zone you're going to. If someone wants to drink alcohol, have a sweet, whether it's a dessert, I always say eat it within your feeding window. Just adjust your feeding window if you're going out to dinner with friends and you want to be able to enjoy a good meal. So it's not about deprivation. It's all about moderation. So you can still eat fun foods. You can still do that within your feeding window. That's usually the strategy I kind of start with, a very basic one. I mean, there are more advanced strategies, but I find that most people that suffices really well. And actually I am reading a good book right now, which I know you are familiar with. And now I'm like trying to find it on my desk. My kids were in here earlier, which is kind of funny. I'll show it to you later. But yeah, it's really been, for many of the women I work with, it's really been pivotal. And the other piece is when women's hormones really start to shift north of like late 30s, for many people, it is one of the few things that will work really well. Now, it doesn't work for everyone. And I always say that if you start intermittent fasting as a woman and you're not getting the results you want, and it's almost always focused on weight loss, there are other things that might be at play. And so that's where we really start peeling back. I always say, I make the onion analogy. There's always something that could be contributing to that. And so really looking at like peeling back a layer. Is it a food sensitivity? Is it that your sleep is terrible? Is it that your stress levels are out of control? Really looking hormonally what could be going on in the body, what supports are needed. But I think it's a great first step. And I think for men and for women, it seems like the men have an easier time losing weight if they're kind of stuck. But I think, they're out of all the strategies that are available, I think this is something people can do long-term, which really is what makes it beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I can't help but educate people on is that sometimes when you eat is more important than what you're eating. And in the labs, the blood work that we do prove it time and time again. And it's not to say that people don't have to obviously still make changes in their diet, but this is something, as you said, this strategic way of slowly closing the gap is an amazing tool that sort of buys you some time while you're making those bigger life adjustments of what to eat. So that really helped. I hope it helped a lot of the female listeners as well, just to see this adaptation tool. And it sort of does get back to that core thing that breakfast is in fact the most important meal of the day. It's just when are you having that breakfast, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I saw something interesting on social media today, on Twitter, in fact, and someone said, my breakfast is my fat cells shrinking, or something like that. It was just, they were trying to make the comment of, you can get by without eating, and you just recognize what's going on, and you've got this, amazing thermogenic burn that's going on, especially if you've exercise fasted. Mm-hmm. So lots of different strategies that you can use, but really, really effective. And someone said to me the other day, oh, it's a trendy concept. I said, no, it actually dates back to biblical times. It's not trendy. It's become more popular, I think, as people are becoming more comfortable with, kind of pressing up against the status quo of, oh gosh, I've got to get up and eat in the morning. I'm like, our bodies really aren't designed to eat first thing in the morning. We're just conditioned to believe that we have to eat when we get up in the morning. Otherwise our day is going to be ruined. And that's just really not the case.
Well, I also think that sorry, Dave, I don't know, you want to jump in on a question here. I think that there's universal consciousness at play here. There's an absolute need for it in the times that we live in. And so there's a reason for popularity to move with collective consciousness. Just like, once one person figured out how to fly a plane, everybody was doing it. It was the thing. Right now, it's out of necessity that we find a way to change the trajectory of these illnesses, because we look at stats, they're not improving. There's nothing with all the medications in the chronic illness world. There's nothing that's actually moving the needle. This perhaps is the tool that can help to really shake things up. Go ahead, David.
Well, and you're talking about, we talked about the other day, absolute truths versus relative truths. You go worldwide and you leave the United States, and fasting is a very regular thing in a lot of other countries. And you, like you're saying, Cynthia, you talk to people here and like, oh, it's just a fad. And it's like, no, it's not. We've been doing this for centuries, and you leave the U.S. and this is a very normal thing that people do all the time. They don't eat 24/7. They don't have food in front of them 24 hours a day, and they're just constantly snacking. And it's so crazy when you just have this conversation with individuals where they think, oh gosh, I have to go without food. I'm going to starve to death. And that, when it first started getting popular, that was the conversations that I would always have, is like, I can't not eat breakfast. I'll fall over and pass out. Kind of looking at them like, no, you won't. You'll be completely fine. Yeah. You got to embrace that adaptation, right? So yeah, I mean, to our listeners, like Cynthia was talking at the very beginning of this podcast, think for yourself, think outside the box, use your brain. Don't let other people think for you, because honestly, that's where those answers are to get you well.
Well, I think it's also very intuitive. I mean, to me, fasting is very intuitive. I can intrinsically understand, my stomach can grumble. It doesn't mean I'm hungry. Like, what are the real ways I feel when I'm really hungry? And that's what I respond to. And, something that's worth adding is that there seems to be a mindset that if you're doing intermittent fasting, you have to ascribe to a particular dietary philosophy. And I just want to make sure that I mention intermittent fasting works with a multiple ways of eating our food. You don't have to be ketogenic. You don't necessarily have to be low carb. You don't necessarily have to be paleo. What I do find is less processed diets are what work. If you have a lot of weight to lose, ketogenic might be a great option. I personally carb cycle. I get asked this question all the time. I carb cycle, and I'm really boring. If I tell you what my diet is like right now, because we've had a lot of shifts since I left the hospital, because my digestion has just not been as optimized as it was before, even 6 months later, which is really kind of sad. But people always want to know, I'm gluten, grains, dairy, and oxalate free, which means my world is a little small right now, but that's okay. I'm pushing through. Like, I actually told my husband, when I had to knock out the oxalates as a gluten-free, grains-free person, I was like, oh my God, what the heck am I going to eat? But you get through it. You want to get better, and that's ultimately where your focus is. But to make sure everyone understands, you don't have to do keto NIF. Like, I get constant questions. In fact, I created like another FAQ for my website because I got the question so much. I was like, no, you can be ketogenic and not do IF. You can do IF and not be ketogenic. They're not like indispensable of one another. So important distinction to make.
Well, and I have a lot of people, the easiest way, because they don't want to change their diets, drastically at first, right? When we talk about these people's starting point, just doing some intermittent fasting, and I tell them, and just eat real food. Just start there. That's hard enough huge for some people.
Yeah,
and
huge.
So that's where I start a lot of my clients is just, look, do that window, find your eating window, and just start eating real food. And it does amazing things, like you're saying. Like, and they come back like 2 weeks later. They're like, "Oh, my energy is so much better, and I'm sleeping better, and my brain's clear." And you're just like, "Yeah, it's that simple."
Yeah, and I think again, it goes back to basics. Like, I will oftentimes say, we need to get back to basics. We need to sleep. We need to poop. We need to fast. There's always a running variation in my head of like getting back to basics. It does not have to be complicated. Nothing makes me more frustrated and upset when people, I'll use the example, Beachbody. So Beachbody pushes this horrible Shakeology. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's complete garbage. And so I was amazed one night. I have a friend who was talking about how wonderful these shakes are. And so I looked at the package and I tasted it and I said, that is probably the worst thing I've ever tasted. It's $100 a bag. So all these women are buying into this crap. Or Isogenics is another one. Sorry.
That's okay.
Just recognizing I have noisy dogs. My kids are running to go get them quiet.
They're protesting as well.
My dogs do not fast. My dogs are pretty. They let me know what time it is. They're like clocks. But just this whole concept that we have to buy the latest pill or potion or powder. Yeah. And I'm like you mentioned, just getting back to basics, eating real food, you will do much, much better. People say all the time, well, can't you recommend a protein powder? And I'm like, I could, but I'd rather you eat the food. I think your body really needs the food. You need to chew it and you need to swallow it. It needs to hit your stomach so you get full. And I find when people are really focused on shakes and potions and powders, they don't get full. So then they're eating more food. And people are like, oh, but I love my smoothie. I put like 95 different things in it. I'm using like that camu and I'm using maca and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I'm like, save your money. Go buy some really good grass-fed beef or go buy some wild-caught fish. I'd rather you do that. So,
well, and I think a little bit of that paradigm is that magic bullet thinking that conventional medicine has created for people, that there's a pill, there's an easy fix, right? And I think that's slowly dissipating in the U.S. People are starting to realize like, oh, wow, there isn't a magic bullet. There isn't this quick fix. And like, I'm actually going to have to put some work into my health. And it's like you're saying, you had individuals at the front end, the ones that were willing to do the work, that you had those answers for. And I think this is what it's all about. Is there is work when it comes to wanting to be healthy, and there is no magic bullet. And you gotta, if that's the case, you're upside down right now, and you need to just 180 it and realize that the answer is on the other side.
Yeah. So on that note, you've got so much to share for women, men alike. Your message is so powerful. It's so important. We want our listeners to be able to find you, to reach you, to follow you. What are the best ways for them to get in touch with you and keep
so my website is www.cynthiathurlow.com. I am active on Twitter and Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. We just did a brand revision. So my old business name was CHT Wellness. You may find that as well. It's all one and the same person, but I've got a great FAQ on intermittent fasting that I find a lot of people have benefited from, answers a lot of like the most frequent questions I receive. So would love for you to check things out.
Definitely. And any upcoming talks, TED Talks, workshops, anything that are coming down the pipeline that people can look out for as well?
Yeah, I'm going to be, so my newest thing is I'm going to be out in LA. I'm going to be on Good Morning La La Land. So out in LA next month. I actually turned down another TED Talk because now I'm kind of in the position like after the second TED Talk, there's never going to be a TED Talk like that again. And so I'm just going to enjoy and savor and bask and all the amazingness that's going on. But there's I've gotten connected with some pretty incredible people in New York. So there's a lot coming down the pike, a couple programs that are coming out this fall that women may really enjoy. You can find more information out on my website. But yeah, I'm always looking forward. So there's things that are brewing. They're just not solidified, but definitely in LA next month.
That's really exciting. So one of the things that we get all of our guests to share with us is a little bit of home play. We encourage people to start somewhere and some of the topics that we've discussed. And so I know we hit a few points, but if we could sort of like fine tune it for people who maybe are new to some of the work that you're sharing here, what's a good home play for people to dive into?
I would say start with 12 hours of fasting and slowly open it up from there. I would encourage everyone to try to eat less from a box, a bag, or a can. And if you do eat those things, less ingredients. If you can't recognize the ingredient, don't eat it. And then thirdly, I would say really good quality sleep is absolutely critical. It is foundational to our health. We are unfortunately in a society that doesn't value sleep. So one of the strategies that I work on with my patients is wearing blue blocking glasses. Like typically I have them on at 5 o'clock. My kids laugh at me. Everyone in my house has them. I'm really the only one who wears them consistently, but I put them on as soon as it starts getting dusk and I wear them until I go to bed. It makes a huge impact on my sleep quality. And I'll explain to your listeners why. melatonin starts being secreted in the later parts of the afternoon. And so what happens if we're exposed to all this junk light, like from our computers and the TV, it will, disrupt the secretion of that melatonin hormone that tells our body it's time to go to bed. And so what it'll do is actually tap into cortisol, which is the hormone that tells us to be awake and alert. And you think about the wired and tired feeling we get later in the evening. And so just being very respectful of our sleep hygiene. That's the first thing. Trying to sleep in a cold, dark room. If any of you have wives that are middle-aged or older, you understand that like temperature for us is, I'd say high 60s at most in the evening. I mean, I want the air conditioning on and cold, dark room. Maybe you're wearing an eye mask, but just getting into the habit of really emphasizing sleep hygiene is absolutely critical for men and women alike.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Cynthia, it's been an absolute honor to have you on the call. I know you've got a very full schedule. We really appreciate the fact that you took some time out to speak with us today. Yeah. David, any last words for everybody?
You're a wellness rock star. Just keep doing it. I see huge things coming for you. So thank you again. This was a blessing for us to have you with us and for our listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Really an honor.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the Dr. Dads and share with your family and friends. You can also follow and interact with Dr. Nick and Dr. David on Facebook and Instagram for a daily dose of inspiration and the latest in health and wellness. Be well.